Sam, I'll say this, reading your Twitter feed, you would think the Dolphins were out of it in the throes of a miserable season, an abject failure. What gives, man?
Well, that's what it feels like right now, Chris. I mean, it's a really weird feeling to have a winning record, having beat the Buffalo Bills earlier this season, having beat the New England Patriots earlier this season, in control of our own destiny. If the season stopped right now as we were recording, the Dolphins would be in the playoffs. Yet for some reason, at the pit of our stomach, and maybe it's just muscle memory, when it comes to the Miami Dolphins late in a season, because we have been here before as a Miami Dolphins fan base, it feels like we are losing and that we have no shot at anything. And I think that has to do a lot with the fact that the team at some points during the season, Chris, played very well, looked like a Super Bowl contender. Tua was, in talks for MVP, all that fun stuff. And now we look anything but. So I think that's why I sound depressed on Twitter. I think that's why Miami Dolphins fans everywhere feel depressed. Even though we're 8-7 in control of our own destiny, it feels like a long shot.
All right, walk me through this here. 4 straight losses. And, a lot of it, I think, at least from the outside, you can blame it on, look, it was a bad schedule. You're going out west, you're playing 2 playoff teams on the road. That's a challenge. You come back east, you're playing Buffalo in the middle of a blizzard. Walk me through this here, though. Why have the Dolphins appeared to kind of hit the skids here after a really strong start?
Well, yeah. So, I mean, if you look at this team as a whole, it's a very streaky team. They start the season 3-0. Tua gets injured. They lose the next 3. They're now at 500. They win the next 5 on a very easy part of their schedule. The games that they were supposed to win, Chris, they won. So kudos to them for that. And then they lose the 4 in currently where we're at now. I think the frustration for Miami Dolphins fans, to kind of go back and link this to the first question here, Chris, is that the way they've lost these games over the last 4 have been wildly different. Mm-hmm. And, you can almost be like, if it was just linebackers giving up passes or long runs in 4 games straight, and that's how you lost, you kind of almost feel better about that. Like, okay, at least we know what the problem is. We have to diagnose this and fix this. They lose that Niner game, mainly because Tua Tagovailoa physically couldn't execute a really good game plan. If you go back and watch the tape, outside of that first drive, which was 1 pass to Trent Sherfield for a touchdown, he left so many points on the board against a very good 49ers defense. He overthrew receivers. Jalen Waddle had at least 2 touchdown passes that didn't happen because he couldn't place the ball where he normally is, which is Tua's calling card, right? So you lose that game because Tua physically just didn't do it against that Niners defense. You lose the Chargers game mainly because of a bad game plan. Like the Niners, it was a really good game plan. You watch that Chargers game, it's like, I don't even know what they're trying to do out there. Mm-hmm. Defensively, it's 3rd and goal from the 14, and you put everybody in the end zone. What do the Chargers do? They get 13 yards when they need 14. What do you think they're going to do on 4th and goal from the 1-yard line? They're going to go for it, and you give up a touchdown when it should have been. It was just a bad game plan. And then you go up to Buffalo, and you play well, especially on offense. You play really well when nobody gave us a shot. They actually matched up really well with Buffalo this year for whatever reason. And at the end of the game, you're up by 8 in the 4th quarter. The defense gives it up. And it's a different way to lose every single time, which is really, really frustrating as a fan or somebody who's watching this team because you just don't know what to diagnose. And then you get to the Packers game, special teams falls apart again. Tua obviously is hurt, which doesn't help anything in the second half. So you just have this team that seems to have a different deficiency every single week during this losing season, right? Or during this losing streak right now. And that right now is such a big head scratcher, which I think kind of, again, ties back into the first part of everyone just feeling bad about the team.
And I know we're going to get into more stuff down the road, but I'm glad you bring up Tua. And I know that he's not playing, or at least it looks like he's not going to play this week. And I want to ask more about that down the road. But given the way he was unable to execute against the Niners in that instance, the one that you just brought up, and his late game struggles against the Packers, is there any sort of long-term concern about him as, the man in Miami?
When he plays and he's healthy, which is the key, I think he's shown this year that he can play with any quarterback and he can run with any team. I mean, you see what he did against Baltimore in that 4th quarter. You see what he did against Buffalo the week after that. You've seen what he did against bad teams or mediocre defenses. He carved them up. I mean, you look at his stats, and stats don't tell the whole story, but they give you some color to the story. He's number 1 in QB rating in the league still. When it comes to his efficiency, when it comes to, what he's doing in terms of pushing the ball down the field. I mean, everybody's narrative for the first 2 years is he couldn't throw the deep ball. Well, now he's leading the planet and throwing the ball deep to the point where some of us are looking at him going, why don't you do the check down every now and then? Why don't you look for Raheem Mostert? Why don't you look for Jeff Wilson? You don't have to throw it to Tyreek and Jalen every single time. Give your other receivers that are closer to the line a chance to eat in terms of getting the ball and turning and running it upfield. So he's changed the narrative there. And I think the national media has changed their narrative from he can't throw the ball, he can't play quarterback, to he can't stay healthy, which is a better narrative. Although I do think on some level, and maybe we can get into this or maybe not, it seems to me that the national media and local media on some level has it out for Tua. They want him to fail for one reason or another. And the first one of he can't play quarterback, I think has been negated by Mike McDaniel in this offense. But that injury concern is very real. And that whole narrative has shifted to, well, now he can't stay healthy, therefore he can't play quarterback. It's a very weird sort of like collusion amongst the media members. I'm not talking about you, of course. But yeah, I mean, it's there are some concerns long-term, to answer your question outright, and I think it has to do with the injuries. I mean, he's got 2 concussions that we know of. The hip is never going to be 100%. He's had bad ankles. He's never played a full season in the NFL. And you look at his build, and he's slight build. And if he gets hit, that's when you hold your breath as a Miami Dolphins fan or anybody watching this team.
I want to talk about that narrative. It's good that you bring that up, because I do think that there's some of that. How much of that do you think is tied back to his inability to connect with, and look, I'm not placing blame on either individual here, but his inability to connect with Brian Flores last year in the year before?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I would just flip it a little bit and say it was Brian Flores' inability to connect with his quarterback. I mean, when you're the head coach, when you're the leader, you have to, it's almost like being a parent, if your child isn't, acting the right way, on some level, you have to be the one that extends that olive branch to the child and start over. If you're waiting for the child to come out and do it, it's probably never going to happen. And on some level, that relationship between the head coach and the quarterback, that head coach has to take that half a step forward. And you look at what Mike McDaniel did from the day he was hired, calling Tua Tagovailoa from the private plane saying, my job is to unlock you. That never happened with Brian Flores. I mean, it was a stark difference between the two of them. And I do think Tua is a very streaky player. He's a very emotional guy. And you look at the way he handles with Mike McDaniel versus Brian Flores. I mean, I think it came out on the broadcast a couple of weeks ago. He was actively looking at himself in the mirror during his first 2 seasons saying, do I suck? And I think that has a lot to do with Brian Flores not doing that extra effort to actually touch with Tua Tagovailoa. So to me, I would just flip it. That's the only thing. Now, there are reports that during the season last year against the Tennessee Titans at halftime, a really bad game by Tua in that one, he went after Brian Flores in terms of verbally going after him, saying that he was a bad leader and he wasn't helping the team and so on and so forth, which I think is part of the reason why Brian Flores was probably let go at the end of the season that year.
Yeah.
So to me, I look at that now and go, well, Tua was being a leader. He was basically being the voice of other Dolphins players in that locker room saying, hey, this isn't right. You're not doing this the right way. But I don't know. I know I'm rambling a little bit here. I think Tua is a sensitive guy, but I also know that he grew up being coached by Nick Saban. So it's not like he hasn't had a disciplinarian in his life before. It's not like he hasn't had his father push him from day one. I mean, if you haven't seen it, there's a documentary about Tua, Chris, where he's basically anointed by his family that you will be the savior. You will be the one that brings our name up to royalty status. I mean, I don't care who you are. There's no more pressure than that's going to be put on your shoulders than your family saying you are the chosen one. So to me, I do put more blame on Brian Flores. But, maybe there's something there. I mean, the fact that he didn't respond the way you would think a quarterback and a leader should respond to that type of criticism, maybe there's something there long term. But again, I think really it's more about the injuries at this point than anything else.
The other thing too, and you bring up his history in Miami, and I have to wonder if in the back of his mind that whole flirtation, or at least Stephen Ross's flirtation with Tom Brady, plays into it as well. You need to be able to be told consistently as the quarterback, you're the man, you're the guy, you're our number one. And over the years, whether it's been the messages he's been getting from Brian Flores or the fact that there was the very public dalliance with Tom Brady, I think that all kind of feeds into the conversation with.
Well, not just Tom Brady, but Deshaun Watson. I mean, let's be honest. We were this close to trading for Deshaun Watson last year, and it was very open. I mean, there's certain members of the South Florida media that had really good relationships with Brian Flores, and certain members of the media have really good relationship with Stephen Ross. Those stories were planted by them, in my opinion. to just kind of gauge the interest from the fans, gauge the interest from the players that they were going after. But you're right. I mean, they went after Tom Brady. They kicked the tires on Deshaun Watson. I mean, if you're the quarterback and you're Tua Tagovailoa, and you're like, these people drafted me 5th overall and they want nothing to do with me, that takes a toll. I mean, I think that's why Mike McDaniel had to go above and beyond, cutting up 700 plays, showing him that you can do this. And it showed in not only how he played on the field for the most part this season, Chris, but you can see his attitude. I mean, he would throw a touchdown and he's dancing right there in the middle of the field. He didn't do that last year when he did throw touchdowns occasionally. He would just kind of trot off to the sideline. Different vibe altogether. But you're right. I mean, say what you will about Mike McDaniel and Tua Tagovailoa, and I'm fans of both of them. The franchise in general, Stephen Ross has been a failure of an owner. I'll just say that right now. And you can make a case that the other folks in the front office should be there or not. I don't know. I'm not here to make that decision yet, but I am in the camp that Stephen Ross probably should not be owning an NFL team any longer.
All right, well, let's spin this forward here. We know that, or at least we're fairly certain, we sit here on Thursday afternoon, that Teddy Bridgewater is going to get the start in place of Tua. And I think people here in New England are curious how much the offensive game plan might change at all with Teddy under center as opposed to Tua.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think Teddy has more zip on the ball. He's definitely got a stronger arm. You know, we saw Teddy Bridgewater, or Teddy Two Gloves, as we like to call him here in South Florida, earlier this season against the Jets, and it was not a great game. I mean, he wasn't in there very long. He was in there against Cincinnati as well. The one thing that stuck out to me when Teddy took over was that Jalen Waddle really struggled with catching the ball from Teddy Bridgewater. And I don't know if that's the old classic thrown from a left-hander versus a right-hander, or if it just happened to be, you know, a coincidence that he dropped 3 or 4 very catchable balls when Teddy was in, whereas, you know, Tua would not. Maybe it had something to do with the velocity of the ball. Not sure. So I think the game plan that you will see deployed for the rest of the season, which is 2 more games, of course, if not more in the playoffs, is that the Miami Dolphins have figured out a way to have an effective running game the last, call it 3 to 4 weeks, even during this downturn in terms of their losing streak. Raheem Mostert and Jeff Wilson are almost both at 5 yards per carry. They looked very good over this last 4 games, especially against Buffalo. They look good against Green Bay. They just didn't get the ball enough. So I would expect to see Raheem Mostert and Jeff Wilson Jr. A little more often, probably especially on 3rd and short situations as opposed to running the ball. And I think the idea is if they can get a running game going, let's just use the Patriots this weekend, then you'll start to see that single high safety look where they're going to bring the other safety down towards the block to help, or towards the box to help protect against the run. And then you might see Teddy go over the top. But I expect a lot of Tyreek Hill in this game. I think he is going to be the guy that's going to have to step up and be the captain and the leader of this offense. I expect Tyreek Hill to get double-digit looks. I expect Jalen Waddle to be option 1B. And after that, I would expect a heavy dose of running backs, whether that's short passing game, running the ball, but more running backs, less down the field every single play.
That's certainly one thing where the Patriots have struggled again, and they faced a fleet of really good wide receivers over the last month and a half. You know, you can go back and look at, you know, Justin Jefferson, and it just goes on and on and on and on and on. I know that I think we talked about this back in September before the Patriots Dolphins game, the opener. But give me the name of one guy, a non-star, someone we wouldn't necessarily hear or know about here, the casual fan would know about here in New England, who has a chance to make an impact on Sunday.
Yeah, I don't know if he's a no name at this point, but if you haven't been watching Christian Wilkins, or if you're not paying attention to Christian Wilkins on the defensive line for the Miami Dolphins, then you're watching football the wrong way. I mean, this guy is an impending free agent. He is going to get the bag. I mean, if you look at what this guy does, he is an absolute disruptor. If you look at how the Miami Dolphins have played against traditional running games this season, they've been fantastic. They struggle against running quarterbacks, but a traditional run game, they have been locked down. I mean, look what they did to Aaron Jones this past weekend against the Green Bay Packers. He got nothing. And a lot of that has to do with Christian Wilkins in the middle. He's a nose tackle. He's a defensive end, depending on the scheme, but he gets in there and he makes plays. Even if he's not the one that makes the tackle, he's the one that basically pushes the entire line back and lets somebody else gobble that tackle up. So on defense, I'll say Christian Wilkins for the Miami Dolphins is the player that the New England Patriots really need to scheme. He's been the best player on defense, bar none. I don't know how he didn't make the Pro Bowl. I don't know how he's not an all-pro selection. The guy has been absolutely fantastic. On offense, that's a tough one because it is Tyreek Hill and it is Jalen Waddle. Those are the two guys. Jeff Wilson Jr. to me has not been utilized enough by the Miami Dolphins. He's kind of the backup running back, if you will. That guy runs very hard. He's not the biggest guy in the world, but it's hard to take that guy down with just one defender. So if I had to throw it anywhere, it would be Jeff Wilson. Certainly not going to be Mike Gesicki, the disappearing man. Trent Sherfield occasionally shows up and does something, but then occasionally he doesn't. So I'm going to go Jeff Wilson on offense, Jeff Wilson Jr., excuse me, Jeff Wilson Sr., and Christian Wilkins on defense.
All right, put your hoodie on. Play the role of Bill Belichick here. Give me a scenario where the Patriots win on Sunday. Give me 3 or 4 things the Patriots have to do to be able to defeat the Miami Dolphins.
Well, you said that with such authority. I started looking around to see if I had a hoodie on. I'm like, oh, he's telling me what to do here. I don't have one nearby. I think the Patriots right now have more momentum, even though they have a losing record. The Patriots have had their own struggles, especially the last few weeks, but those plays to end the game are such an anomaly. I mean, you can't say like, well, they're going to blow it on the last play of the game again. I mean, the fact that it happened 2 weeks in a row in terms of that weird lateral, and then of course the fumble by Ramondre Stevenson, who's a very good player, by the way. You can't bank on that. I think if you're the New England Patriots, you have to figure out a way to run the ball in the non-traditional sense, whether that's, a jet sweep by a wide receiver or some sort of trickeration, if you will, to get the ball into somebody who can run, because the Miami Dolphins don't do well outside of the traditional run game stop. When it comes to throwing the ball, Mac Jones is going to have to stand in there and find the right guy to throw the ball to. I really do think this is going to be a low scoring game just because of all factors that we're talking about here. It's going to come down to the defense. If I'm Bill Belichick, I am scheming this defense, looking to get the ball to turn over, looking for Teddy Bridgewater, who hasn't been in a game since about week 5, force him to beat you. See if he can go beat bracket Tyreek Hill, see if he can get the ball to Jalen Waddle, and that's it. I think that's what you have to do, is you have to get in Teddy Bridgewater's face. He's not a guy who's going to run the ball very often. He's somewhat statuesque back there. Scheme it up to actually, play defense and knock him down. Teddy Bridgewater can fumble the ball every now and then. He doesn't have tack on those 2 gloves that he wears. So to me, it's got to be a defensive, hold by the New England Patriots. And then on offense, you got to get the ball to somebody in space. The Miami Dolphins haven't been great in terms of open field tackling this season. So whether it is a run game or something in the flat and let them turn it up and make somebody miss, that will happen, and big gains from there.
One of the things that stands out to me, at least looking at the numbers, is, and we talked about this before, Miami struggles when it comes to special teams. And you just mentioned the fact that Miami struggles with tackling in space. And then Wednesday, we get the news that Marcus Jones is out with a concussion. He seems to me the kind of guy, he's ascending faster and faster, and he's becoming more and more of a playmaker each and every week in all 3 phases. If the Patriots have him, that would be a huge step in the right direction for him against Miami.
Yeah, and I'm hoping you guys can sign Julio Jones in the offseason. You guys don't have enough Joneses on the New England Patriots. I think there's 4. If Mac Jones,
Mac Jones, Jack Jones, Jonathan Jones, Marcus Jones, and I know I'm missing one.
Well, that's
4 right. Yeah, that's enough. Yeah.
And you guys, what I like about it, I'll give the Patriots credit here, which I can't believe I just said that, but you guys haven't gone the route of putting the first initial on the jersey, which you can't, because you have 2 J Joneses and 2 M Joneses.
Yeah.
So you really can't do that. But it's just Jones, and I like that. I don't like when they have the first initial of the name on there. It's like, who cares? There's 2 Joneses. I mean, go get Chandler Jones and Julio Jones, and let's just
just be done with
Joneses.
It. Yeah. Well, one of the other things too is, you have a Mac Jones and a Marcus Jones, and in instances like that, you'd go MA, there'd be a different, so you can't do that. So maybe we get into a situation with Jack Youngblood where you put the whole name on the back of the jersey. Who knows? We'll see.
If you are going to do that, then I agree. You put the whole name, not just the initial, not just the first 2 letters. I want the full name, first, middle, and last on that jersey. Make that big rainbow when you see those long names like Tuiasosopo or something. But no, and you're right. It's special teams. Earlier this season, there was a pretty famous play where the punter for the Miami Dolphins, Thomas Morstead, was punting out of his own end zone, punted the ball, booted it as hard as he could right into the rear end of Trent Sherfield. And it was a safety, of course. And I posted on Twitter this week, Chris, like, if I could describe the Miami Dolphins season in one picture, it would be that one, because they are pretty much last in all categories for special teams: kick returns, punt returns, defending kickoffs, defending punt return. It's been a nightmare, and it's not anything that anybody's really talking about. There's a lot of scrutiny about the defensive coordinator, some scrutiny about Mike McDaniels, a rookie head coach, and some of the decisions he's made or hasn't made. But special teams has almost lost the Miami Dolphins 2 or 3 games this season, and they've certainly contributed to losses. So that's an area where, again, the New England Patriots usually do pretty well from what I can tell on special teams. That might be another area where the Patriots can steal some points.
All right, let me give you a nightmare scenario to cap off what is the second half of a rough season for Miami. The Patriots beat Miami in the cold up here. You mentioned, this is a movie we've seen before.
Yeah.
The Patriots ended, because I've seen that a million times, where a good Miami team comes up to New England in December or January, last year aside, and, they knock off the Patriots, or 2 years ago aside, and they end up knocking off the Patriots. So New England wins, and then Buffalo next week is locked in for that number one spot and rest their starters. And the Patriots beat Buffalo, and then you complete that comeback if you're New England, driving Miami out of the playoff picture. Would that just be the cherry on top of the sundae, the misery sundae for Miami fans?
I think the last 2 seasons, Miami's ended with a winning record, and they have been eliminated in week 17 effectively, to where week 18 now, I guess last year would have been the first year for week 18. It really didn't mean much. And the scenario that I see is we lose to the Patriots. We drop to 8-8. We're still in control if we can beat the Jets for the most part. And then we somehow get eliminated prior to the Jets-Dolphins game ending, and then we beat the Jets and go 9-8 and miss the playoffs yet again. Yeah, again, I've read this book. There's so many Star Wars movies, and I've seen all of them when it comes to the Miami Dolphins version of it. So it would not surprise me. I mean, I still think there's a little bit of hope right around here where the heart is, Chris, to where Teddy Bridgewater can come out and just play a game of catch with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, and we put this to bed this week. But I don't know, looking ahead, I mean, what's your best case scenario if you're the Miami Dolphins? You go to the playoffs and you get to go to Arrowhead as your
it's the same feeling in New England. The idea being that, look, you're in the tournament, as my co-host LeGarrette Blunt says, and anything can happen. And look, Bill in the postseason is usually pretty good, but really, the numbers suggest that you're just a speed bump for Kansas City or whoever at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I think the reason, the justification, outside of being a fan, of course, why I want the Miami Dolphins in the playoffs is that we pushed all our chips in this year, Chris. I mean, we went out and got Tyreek Hill. We went and got Bradley Chubb, which has been a disaster for the Miami Dolphins, in my opinion. They don't have a first-round pick. They don't have a second-round pick. You make the playoffs, and at least it justifies the fact that you would have been picking later in that first round as opposed to like 15 or 16, where maybe if you are thinking a new quarterback or you're thinking a running back, especially the kid out of Texas or something like that, you might have a shot at. We don't have a shot at any of that. So you want to make the playoffs and at least justify all those first round picks being, shoved away for these current players. And then you go, well, at least we made the playoffs. So it's better than we've been before. But yeah, it's really difficult. And in just mapping this out, let's just say you beat Kansas City. Somehow, some way, Tyreek Hill has a revenge game and you beat Kansas City in the wild card round and everybody's high-fiving. It'd be the first time Miami would win a playoff game in 20 some odd years. Your reward for that is to go back to Buffalo and play Buffalo again for a third time.
But that's a good matchup for you. I mean, that at least in theory, on what you mentioned before, and watching the two games play out, that's a decent matchup if you're the Dolphins. Not a horrible matchup. It's a decent matchup.
If you have Tua under center. I don't know if that stays the same if Teddy Bridgewater or Skylar Thompson is there. So that is the caveat. But you're right. I mean, I could only hope to be so lucky to see that matchup happen. But we got to get through New England first if you're a Miami Dolphins fan. And then you got to, you owe the Jets one for earlier this season. And I think it's kind of funny, Chris, because we're talking a little bit about this. The AFC East about a month ago was in my opinion, the strongest division. You can make a case for the NFC East. Mm-hmm. And since then, Buffalo has moonwalked into the playoffs. The Jets, the Patriots, and the Dolphins are all limping. As my co-host said, we're crawling through glass to get to the playoffs right now. And it's a weird feeling. Again, a month ago, you're like, man, there's a bunch of killers in this division. And now you're like, well, 3 of them have been killed. So it's really, really weird to see that change so rapidly.
Give me one team out of the AFC that's your pick right now. Is it Buffalo? I'm assuming it's either Buffalo, Kansas City, or Cincinnati.
Yeah, I don't like any of those teams. I mean, just as a fan of the NFL, I'm not a fan of any of them. I think Kansas City, I guess I would root for Kansas City because I think the narrative when Tyreek Hill left and came to the Miami Dolphins is that Kansas City was going to take a step back. And, what everything the Raiders did in the offseason and the Broncos and the Chargers, who do look better, everyone predicted that the Kansas City Chiefs would take a step back, and they haven't. They haven't missed a beat. So I think my money would be on Kansas City. That's a really, really veteran, gritty team that knows how to win in the playoffs. They have good coaching. They've got great players on both sides of the ball. So I would say Kansas City. I mean, interestingly enough to me, if there's a team that really could make some noise, if they can win next week in week 18, the Jacksonville Jaguars really could be an interesting case for the playoffs. I mean, hope against hope, I suppose, but I'd love to see them in and see what they could do.
I am still all in, at least right now in Buffalo. I just, the way they're playing, they're just a wagon. And if they stay home, that's the thing. I mean, you guys know as well as anyone that Buffalo now in Buffalo is just, I want to say they're a lock, but they're the closest thing to a lock right now in the AFC.
Well, look, Kansas City and Buffalo in Buffalo for the AFC Championship game. That's a game that people are going to tune in to watch if it gets to that point. And I would definitely watch that as well. But to me, I can't root for Buffalo in good conscience on any point. The worst scenario for me, Chris, it would be the 49ers coming out of the NFC, because I live in the San Francisco Bay Area and I can't stand that franchise just because I'm exposed to it every single day. And the Buffalo Bills coming out of the AFC. I think I'd have to retire from watching football at that point. I'd start looking at NBA scores because I don't know who I would even pick for that.
The closest thing for a New England fan was the 2000 World Series between the Yankees and the Mets, right? It's just one of those just awful. You just go, I don't want to watch anymore. I'm done.
Yeah,
I can't watch anymore.
As a Los Angeles Lakers fan, I just experienced the Celtics and Warriors, and I was like, I guess I'm rooting for the Warriors. I don't know what to do here. I just kind of turned it off and was like, I'm gonna just go watch some baseball or something.
All right, give me your prediction for Sunday. As we sit here again, there's some possibilities. We don't know. Obviously, there's some injury questions on both sides of the ball for both teams, but give me your prediction for Sunday.
Yeah, I was looking at the injury report. It looks like a December or early January injury report. The whole team it'd be a shorter list. It'd be like these 4 people are healthy for both teams. Look, you came on here week 1, and I thought it was very big of you. You predicted the Miami Dolphins to win against your New England Patriots week 1, and turns out you were correct. The Miami Dolphins are not good on the road. They don't have their starting quarterback right now. There's a lot of questions. They've lost 4 in a row. And until, I'm a big fan of, if black is hitting roulette, you keep betting black until otherwise. Going on the road in January, I suppose, against the New England Patriots, who I think have a little bit more momentum, even if the record doesn't show it. I'm going to go with the Patriots. And my Dolphins fans out there are going to hate me for it, but I think it's going to be a low-scoring game. I think Miami Dolphins have a really tough time getting the ball into the end zone. They're good between the 20s right now, but they haven't been able to punch it in on a consistent basis. I'm going to go 17-13 New England Patriots.
I think that's a good neighborhood. I do. I agree with you. And again, look, I've seen this story a million times before. I remember the 2002 game, and look, that was 20 years ago now, where the Dolphins had a 10-point lead with like 5 minutes to go, and they ended up spitting a bit. And just, I've seen so many good Miami teams come north and just lay an egg really in December and January, in the same way that the Patriots, when they go down to Miami in September, it's the same scenario. And so I think that plays into it. I think the lack of Tua plays into it. I also think that one thing to look for here, and I'll give you this tip. Every time Bill talks about a quarterback and says he can make all the throws, that's a sign that he's got him figured out. You go back and you look at some of these press conferences, and then you look at what happens on Sunday. So if he says, I don't think he said it this week, but if he's asked about Teddy Bridgewater and says, well, he can make all the throws, that's a sign that Bill is got him. So look, with that being said, I think 17-13 New England is probably a good place to be. One other thing to look for on Sunday, if you're the Patriots, this is something that stuck out to me. We talked about end of game situations, end of half scenarios too for this team. I think I have to go back. It's either 5 or 6 of their losses. They've allowed a touchdown in the last 2 minutes of the first half. They've had defensive breakdowns, and that's something really, if you're a Patriots fan, to look for. It's not the only reason that they've lost those games, but it's not completely coincidental.
No, and my feeble memory might be failing me, but I think that happened in week 1 with Jalen Waddle on that slant play, right? Yeah. I don't know if it was within the last 2 minutes, but it was really close. It was right there. You brought up that 2002 game, and factually you are correct. 5 minutes left, we're up by 10. It was actually 3 minutes when that all happened. And then, of course, Mark Royals forever in my brain with a shank punt of about 25 yards after you had Ricky Williams in the backfield on your own one. And you choose to throw it with Jay Fiedler 3 times in a row. Thank you very much, Dave Wanstead, for that one. That one, we went from being AFC East champs to out of the playoffs in 3 minutes. It was an insane turnaround. At least this time we're doing it over the course of like 5 games. I mean, at least we're extending this pain out, and it's not just a bullet hole to the head. But that's interesting feedback about Bill Belichick. I'm going to start paying attention more to his press conferences and hearing the coach speak. That means something from Bill Belichick.
Exactly. The other thing too is my favorite go-to Belichickism is nobody works harder than this guy. Fill in the blank. if you go back over the years and you Google Bill Belichick and nobody works harder, there is probably, it's a list of like 30 to 40 people. So, and that goes all the way back to 2000.
It would be good to have a Rosetta Stone of Bill Belichick down the road, right? Like once he retires, maybe that's his next source of income. He can just, transcribe and translate everything that Bill Belichick really meant when he said this. It really meant that. That would be a good read.
We'll talk. I'll email you the list. I have a growing list here of Belichick red flags from the press conferences that this means this and this means this and this means this. Thank you so much for taking the time today, my friend.
No, thank you very much. It's always great to talk to you. I wish you nothing but the best. I wish your team maybe a little bit less than that this Sunday, but one way or the other, we'll have some answers after New Year's celebrations.
I love it. Sounds good. And we'll talk soon.